Welcome to the Central Seminary Podcast. Thanks for joining us today as we discuss biblical and theological issues relating to life and ministry. This podcast is a ministry of Central Baptist Theological Seminary in Plymouth, Minnesota. To learn more about Central Seminary, visit our website at www.centralseminary.edu. My name is Jared, and I'll be your host. Well, welcome back to the Central Seminary Podcast. If you haven't checked out some of our previous episodes, go ahead and check those out. If you want to get in contact with us, info@centralseminary.edu is our email address. You can drop us some comments or even some suggestions for future episodes. Today we have two pastors with us, and they are joining us remotely from a couple different places in Minnesota. We have DiVietro and Micah Tanis. Guys, welcome today.
Hello.
They're waving on our video. You can't see that, but they're waving. So today we're going to talk about church associations, the benefit of church associations, why you as a pastor or you as a church member might consider that for your church, some benefits, blessings, even maybe some hindrances or misconceptions. So we're going to talk about those today. But before we get there, just want to start off like we always do and ask these men, are there any books you're reading or books that you're waiting to read and you want to share with us?
Yeah, this summer, this is Micah, pastor at First Baptist Church in Morris, Minnesota. This summer, a pastor in town challenged me to read Reset by David Murray, Living a Grace-Paced Life in a Burnout Culture. The challenge came with an offer of having lunch to talk it over. So it was a great encouragement to read and really encouraged the message of the book.
Okay. How about you, Joe?
Yeah, my name is Joe DiVietro. I pastor Faith Baptist Church in Sauk Center, Minnesota. And there's a couple books three books that I've been kind of playing with here that I've queued up. I've read a little bit of each of them. And I'm kind of one of those guys, I don't just read one book. I got to read like three for whatever reason. The first one is called Small Church Essentials. Really great book. Carl Vadders. Love that. Any church under 250 people. If you've ever dealt in the small church world environment, there are issues that are in small churches and dynamics in small churches that you got to work through. And he does a great job of describing some of those and some of the ways to work through those issues. How to Disciple Men by Patrick Morley. We have a radical men's mentoring ministry in our church. And that's been a book that's been really handy in working with guys, have different ideas, how to interact. And then this one's kind of older. It's not a new book, but Transformational Church by Ed Stelzer and Rayner, and kind of playing with that one. Not as much that one as more the other two, because they're real world dynamics for me, but not that Rayner and them aren't. But I just enjoy reading a diversity of things at the same time. So I guess I have ADHD and get bored reading one book. So.
All right. Thanks for sharing that. So our discussion today, church associations. To start us off here, why don't we just talk about what do we mean by church associations and how might this be different from other words that we might use about groups of churches like conventions or things like that?
Yeah, I like Dr. Bowder term. He says in Baptist usage that an association is a fellowship of churches. So that concept, the concept of fellowship, how we work together, that's I think a key marker when we talk about what in a church association is, that fellowship is the undergirding factor in what it is that we do with churches with each other.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would just go right along with that and say, really, all the churches are autonomous churches in an association. They're not all interconnected. There's not a centralized governing body in the middle of it. It's a bunch of individual churches that agree, usually doctrinally is what they associate on. And we all have very compatible doctrine. Sometimes we have compatible practices, not always. There's a diversity inside the associations, but it's a group of churches that come together and say, hey, for the purpose of doing something bigger than ourselves that we can do all by ourselves, we're going to work together with other churches to do, maybe it's a men's retreat, mission trips, camp ministries, different types of ministries that we would never be able to do as independent churches or individual churches working independently, but we co-op together for a mutual cause usually rallied around a doctrinal statement or a position of faith. So for me, that's what I look at the association as. Sometimes associations work with associations too, right? For different causes and things like that. So sometimes you even get a second level of fellowship there, even outside your circle. And Mike and I really represent two different associations, but there's a lot of talk within our associations, and we do cross over our associational lines. So it's not like war and combat where, I'm not going to go in the enemy turf, but Mike and I, our churches have done a missions conference together. We've gone to each other's churches for different events, and he serves in the MBA, and we're part of the GRBC, or specifically MARBC here in Minnesota. So associations are good, but sometimes they're limiting too. And I think we're going to talk about that today. And I'm excited about that aspect as well.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I wanted both of you men on this episode, because both of you are involved in leadership in your prospective associations. So why don't we talk about those? In Minnesota, there's, I don't know if Maine's the right word, but two more common conservative Baptist associations here in Minnesota, and there may be a few others. But these are state associations. We have the MBA, Minnesota Baptist Association, and the MARBC, Minnesota Association of Regular Baptist Churches. Do you guys want to take a moment or two and maybe describe those?
Sure. Yeah, the Minnesota Baptist Association, we just had our 163rd annual meeting this summer. So that extends way beyond what I can sort of even put in my mind of the years of fellowship and connection. So I'm thankful to be in that line of many who have established what it means to fellowship with each other. The Minnesota Baptist Association, I like one of the taglines that we use is exalting Christ among the churches, that we're seeking for that fellowship with one another, around 45 churches that the MBA has in its network, that we seek to encourage each other with the resources that all of the churches have together. So that's a little bit about the MBA.
Yeah, and the MARBC is kind of a subset of the greater National Association for the Regular Baptist Movement, and it's the General Association of Regular Baptist Churches is our national identity. It's headquartered in Illinois, Chicago area, but really the MARBC is just the Minnesota aspect of that. So the nation is divided up into different regions, not always by state. There are some that are by state or tri-state areas, but Minnesota happens to be one of the individual state ones. And within our state, we have churches that fellowship together, linked by doctrine. Common doctrine is what we use to assimilate or fellowship together with each other. And in the process of doing that, there are basically 26 churches that fellowship together around a doctrinal statement that work together for camping purpose, for men's ministry, ladies ministry, as I mentioned earlier. So I currently serve as the chairman of the Council of Seven. There are 7 pastors elected by the churches and to represent them. And we each serve a 3-year term. And then we're allowed to be reelected for 1 term. And then we get to sit off and take time off and let somebody else serve so that we don't get stuck in a perpetual leadership. So I really appreciate the guys before us who set up the system. But as in everything, you always got to change and adapt and grow. And the MARBC right now is actually looking at it, onboarding a couple churches right now as well up in Thief Rivers and International Falls. So we're kind of excited about that, looking at a couple churches coming on with us and some other discussions in the works too. So we'll see what the future holds, but we're excited about it.
Okay, great. I want to ask some specific questions to each of you. So Micah, you mentioned in conversation once that your church wasn't part of the association when you came, and you kind of led them towards that. Could you talk to us a little bit about that process, why you thought it was important, and then maybe what it entailed to join the MBA?
Yeah, we when I came here in 2014, I had come from First Baptist Church of St. Francis, and with Steve Brower, who is my mentor, he included me in bringing me to a lot of the MBA meetings. So I got to see and be a part of it. St. Francis even hosted one of the annual meetings. So I got to see some of the great benefit of what it meant to be part of association. So when we came to Morris, just asked some questions. There had been some affiliation many, many years ago, but not anything official. So in 2017, we we saw it from a church perspective. So what it took for us is, as a church, we desired to fellowship with the MBA. We had taken some men to men's retreats. And so the church was really seeing the benefit of some of the area churches. So we called a recognition council. That was really helpful for us. And I think one of the great benefits of an association, we had several area pastors come. They read over our constitution, our bylaws. They actually helped us with just some of the verbiage that was in there that from other churches, their wisdom was able to encourage us. And so in the summer of 2017, we voted to fellowship with the MBA at the annual meeting. They welcomed us in, and we've been a part since. And then in 2019 was when I came on board and of the board of trustees of the MBA, now serve as the vice president, really getting to see from the ground up what it was like to begin fellowship with the church, and then also see how good it has been for our church, just to see that there's other churches just like us. I think that was one of the things about us being independent, is we just didn't have a regular reminder, whether through publications or asking for prayer, that there's a lot of churches just like us that are doing the same work around the state of Minnesota. And that's been so encouraging for our church to hear of that. And we've even had some recent ways where that connection has been a great benefit to us.
Okay, great. Joe, I want to toss it over to you, because you're part of a local, state, and a national association. So talk to us about the dynamics there. Do they work together? Is there one that you find more helpful than the other?
Yeah, and I think, Jared, on this question, I think if you asked 100 pastors, you're going to get 103 different answers on this one. So I'm gonna speak from my perspective. First of all, I've been in nothing but GRBC churches. I've served in Missouri, I've served in Kansas, and I've served in Minnesota. So I've been in 3 different association regions. I grew up in a church in Cincinnati, Ohio, actually Covington, Kentucky side, Calvary Baptist Church. And they too were GRBC church growing up. So I've been in the garbage circles for a very long time. I just celebrated my 20th year in ministry and pastoring. And so it's kind of a loaded question, but if I had to answer for myself, the state associations I find the most beneficial on a day-to-day, week-to-week type of front. The national, however, does bring a lot to the table too, in the form of Sunday school curriculum, chaplaincy programs, some short-term mission trip work, also with some guidance and resources, pastoral placement. So there are a lot of benefits there that other pastors probably outside of me take more advantage of. There's also part of our national is the ability to get help on different projects, kind of like a church builders club. They just changed the name of it for us, but you can appeal for or apply for help on a project, and sometimes they'll issue finances from the association to help out with that. So there's a lot on the national level that is a real benefit, as well as an annual meeting that any pastor in the association is free to attend. There is a cost to attend it, but you're able to go to it on an annual basis. It moves around the country. So it's not always, you don't always have to go to Chicago. You can go to a few years back, it was in Maryland, California's had it, Des Moines had it. So it kind of bounces around. Indiana's had it. So there is benefit to that. You find out that there are pastors all over the country, and you make networks all over the country. But for me, the state associations have been the most beneficial to me in my local ministry, because these are other pastors that are serving in the same region you are, going through the same problems you are, struggling with the similar things that you struggle with, or they celebrate with you, right? I mean, like an ordination, all these guys come together and we grill some guy, right, to know what he knows in the ministry. But the reality is it's a big party. You're all pulling for the guy. You want him to do well. You're excited to have a new pastor in the fellowship, in the association. And really, you'll find a lot of times, guys, when they talk about association, whether it be state or national, they don't use the word association. I don't walk around and say, yeah, that's part of that guy's in my association. We use the word fellowship. We fellowship with that church. We fellowship with that church as well. We fellowship with that pastor, that ministry. So, associations really are a form of fellowship, but they're a little bigger than just a loose fellowship. There is a little bit of an organization where we have like a rep that works in our state that tries to help coordinate different things. nationally, we have a rep that, tries to coordinate things on a national level for us. So there is a little bit of structure to it. However, there's not a governing hierarchy. So we're not a denomination in the fact that there's a head and this machine of people underneath it, but every person is its own individual thing, but we're co-oping or working together to accomplish things in the state. So, if I had to answer you honestly, I would say the state level for me is more beneficial. However, I have utilized the national and I've used the national, and I have very good friends that even serve on the National Council of 18 for the GRBC. So they are both beneficial. But me personally, over the years of the 20 years of ministry, I really find the state to be more where I go to for counseling, for working together, looking for other guys to sometimes a cry on their shoulder or to give them a high five, right? Those are the guys you look to, are the local guys.
Okay, well, that kind of opens the door to where we wanted to go with the discussion, to think through what are some of the benefits. Joe, you talked about some of those. What are some of the benefits? How have associations helped you personally in your ministry? And suppose maybe we have a pastor, deacon, church member listening, and their church isn't part of an association. How would you encourage them to consider that based on some of the benefits? Micah, do you want to start us off there?
Yeah, the sharing of resources is something that has been so beneficial for us in just, maybe it's just a simple request of, hey, this church has some VBS resources that they want to share with another church. The other one that has been super helpful to us is in one of the arms of the MBA historically has been the Planning and Watering Committee of seeking to plant churches. And then also the other side of it that's becoming a lot more prevalent is the watering side, the focusing on church revitalization. That right now we've had a lot of conversations with that around the state, looking to some smaller congregations like ours that could use some help. Recently, within the last 2 years, several of the board members have said, hey, how can we be caring for these churches? So each of the board members of the MBA has 3 or 4 churches that they're in regular contact with to just ask, hey, how can we help? What's something that maybe our church has that we could have, or a need that you have that we could share around? So there were churches, Tim Graham down in Cornerstone helped 2 churches just get some audio equipment. So there was just some practical help. Hey, they've got some guys that know how to do audio, can help with that. The church up in Hinckley just had some tornado damage. And so several churches have gone up there with chainsaws just to help. And even us recently as First Baptist Church, our building was 50 years old. So our siding was needing some help. So the MBA itself stepped in with some church help resources, but then also some other MBA churches heard of what we were doing and said, hey, we'd love to take a Harvest Festival offering for that. And so that was just some natural ebb and flow, that there was no massive request that came down, but that churches were seeing what other churches were doing and say, hey, we want to be a part of that. So I'm really encouraged by that church revitalization, the watering part of encouraging one another in this fellowship.
Great.
This is Joe again. I would say for me, the benefits, if you're a deacon, if you're a church member listening to the podcast and your church is not part of an association, I think you're robbing your people of blessings. To be very blunt, your pastor, especially if it's a single staff church, he needs other men in his life that are pastors, yes, to be talking to. And I've been 20 years in the ministry, so it's like you don't survive in ministry as a lone ranger. You don't do it. I have a lot of friends who are lone rangers who are not in ministry today. However, just because you got a bunch of people around you doesn't mean you're necessarily going to win either. There is the aspect of you've got to do your part. So in the association, it's not a take. There is also you got to put into the association as well. So if they're not part of an association, I would say you're robbing yourself of blessings, and your pastor of blessings by not allowing him to have that freedom to fellowship and talk with other churches and do things together and be part of something bigger than yourself. A lot of churches have an inward focus, and being part of an association forces you in many ways to look outside of yourself. So that's what I would tell them. And as far as the benefits, there are so many benefits. I mean, imagine yourself as a single pastor in a church. The average church today is 60, 65 people, post-COVID. and you're in a 65 person church and you're trying to figure out COVID, right? How'd you deal with COVID? And all of a sudden everybody's streaming, and how do you stream? And you could be one of those pastors where you spend literally 3 weeks trying to learn how to do something. Or in an association, guess what? There's already churches streaming. There's already churches recording. There's already churches doing these other things. You call up a pastor friend, and within 15, 20 minutes, you're up and streaming already. So, that was one recent event that utilizes that. But even on a bigger scheme, let's say you're having a problem in your church. Who are you going to call? Yeah. There are no Ghostbusters of Bible world, So you've got to have friends who have been there, done that. You need older men and younger men. You need that mentorship. You need people to bounce ideas off of. And the associations give you a safe place to do that, because we all believe the same thing doctrinally. We might practice differently. We might look a little different. We come at it from a different angle. But in the end, if you held a gun to our head and said, what do you believe? You're going to hear basically the same testimony out of every pastor in your association. So to me, it is a huge safety net. It is a huge encouragement net. It's a huge resource for us to be able to tap into for absolutely free. Most churches give a monthly stipend to their association for administrative and other endeavors that the association's doing, but nothing requires you to do that, right? And pastors that are in associations don't pay dues or anything like that to be in it. So it gives us a network of people with ideas, churches doing different things. I think in 20 years of pastoring, the hardest thing is knowing what other churches are doing. You go on vacation and you got to go out of town to go on vacation. So you pop into another church, see what they're doing. And you're like, how long have you been doing this? Oh, about 26 years. What? I've never heard this. Why do I not? Well, we don't go outside of our churches. We're in our churches all the time. And to hear what other pastors are doing and see what other churches are doing, that is huge in and of itself.
Yeah. And if I could say a few things just personally, from my own experience, I pastored a church that was in the MARBC here in Minnesota. And I grew up in a church that was not connected with an association, so that was kind of new to me. And I didn't really know what to expect. And it took me a little bit to kind of find my feet. But I think for me, the real benefit was that mentorship aspect. As I went to state meetings and I heard men in prayer time talk about how they were doing this at their church. I remember one time, a state meeting we were at, one pastor talked about leading his church through a vision and planning season and how he had gotten some training in that. And afterwards, I said to myself, well, I need to talk to him because I really want to do that at our church. And so we had a few phone calls and sat on the phone for a couple hours and talked about vision and planning and what it looked like and how to lead a church through that. That was helpful. And over the course of that, I eventually developed more relationships, and I had a period of time in leadership in the MARBC, and that only helped me to know more pastors. And I was, kind of a newer, younger pastor, first church as a solo pastor, and it was a great benefit to me just to have older, more mature men that I could talk to, that I could text or call up on the phone and say, hey, here's what I'm dealing with. Help me through this. And you find out that you're not as alone as you think you might be. There's pastors who've gone through it before, and they can say, well, here's what I learned, here's what I did right, here's what I did wrong. And that has been such a great help to me in just being a part of an association like that.
Yeah, and Jared, just to piggyback on that too, and there's more than just the mentoring aspect, right? You actually are learning from guys that are younger than you sometimes. I love the zeal and the energy that comes into association when you get a new young pastor and they come in and they start asking a zillion questions, right? Like, why do you do this? Why do you do that? Why don't we do it this way? And to get that fresh blood, that fresh idea, to hear the excitement of ministry, go talk to the 65-year-old guy, and he's like, yeah, we're still plugging away for Jesus. and there's nothing wrong with that. But, that energy aspect, the excitement of having younger men coming in, and they're encouraging you, and you're trying to mentor them and take care of them and bring them along, and they're teaching you the new technology stuff that you don't know anything about because, well, we're not using that stuff in the real world, quote unquote. So that aspect alone, but Micah talked about this too, revitalization. There's a lot of messed up churches out there today. There's a lot of inward focused churches that aren't outreaching. They're legacy churches that have gotten stagnant. They're not growing. If they are growing, they're stealing from other churches around them that are, disgruntled members because somebody did something in that church. So I'm going to leave there, and this church is over here, same church, just 10 miles further. I'll just go to that one and avoid all my problems. And to have associations and fellowships, the pastors talk. We know why people are moving, and we know sometimes what we're inheriting in problems or resources. Right? Somebody moves because they're working and they go to somebody else's church. I love nothing more than call Micah up and say, "Hey, Micah, man, hey, this couple just moved to your town. You need to plug them in. Don't run them through the whole new member. Get these guys serving. They're like thoroughbreds, right?" So, there's different resources even from that aspect that are encouraging, equipping, people in other churches, and you can help pastors utilize people's gifts and resources in their ministries when people move. But the detriment side to it too, right? You mentioned that earlier. Let's say there's a problem in a church somewhere. The MARBC doesn't have the ability to go to that church and smack them with a 2x4 and say, "Hey, shape up." We have no authority structure. We are a fellowship of churches working together. So there's sometimes this idea like, you can go out there and you can fix some church that's messed up. Well, churches are autonomous. Churches have to fix themselves. They need to bring mature men, mature pastors to come in and help their church get better. A lot of times people want to take aspirin for cancer when it comes to a church. Oh, well, if we get rid of this family, or we get rid of this pastor, or we get rid of this dynamic, then the church will be better. Well, it doesn't always work that way. And associations give us resources, even national associations give us resources of men that we can bring in and help hurting churches. The ironic part of that is, Jared, most of the time churches that need this don't think they need it. And unfortunately, those resources go unused a lot until it's too late and the hand grenade's gone off. And now we're trying to pick up pieces and body parts rather than, helping a church just change to be a stronger church in the association and in their local area for the gospel.
Yeah. And that was kind of where I was going to go next, just about some maybe unreasonable expectations we might have of a church association, or maybe even some of the hindrances that come with being a part of it. Do you have any that might come to mind?
I'm just thinking through, as I serve and as the vice president, so I'll bat away I'll get some of the emails that people are asking about something that in the history of the MBA, we've had some really neat opportunities, even a publishing arm at some time. There've been good things that we've been able to do, but we look at the ebbs and flows of that and realize that with it being a fellowship, it is the strength of that is how we have people that are willing to fellowship and share some of those resources. So right now, a lot of the action of the MBA is happening electronically, that we're able to email and use Facebook and some of the online resources that are able to be out there. But that's limited by my time that I'm able to share things. There's limited by what resources we can put out there, or what accessibility there are. And maybe even some of that memory of 50 years ago. Hey, we did this kind of thing as the MBA. Why aren't we doing that now? It's good for us to look at that and say, hey, it's normal churches that are sharing their resources with each other. I think of maybe even pulpit fill, where as the MBA, we seek to have a list of guys that could be pulpit fill. One of the things that I really have appreciated about that is sometimes taking a guy off of pulpit fill because he actually got called to a church that's needing a pastor. And so it's like, hey, that's actually a good thing to do. And then we may open up that invitation more, but we can only have resources that are available from the churches. And so that's an ebb and flow of us asking, hey, what might you have in your church that you could be a help with others? So it takes a little creativity to think about what that is, but that's some of the nature of maybe some of the hindrances that could be in a fellowship of churches.
Yeah, and I serve as a Council of 7 chairman for the MARBC currently. And, some of the hindrances is we're still people, right? We're limited in our resources. We're limited in our experiences. We're limited in the people that serve on the Council of Seven and the gifts that they have at any one time. So when you talk about the MERBC, when you look at the real strength of it, the strength of it is the churches. It's an association of churches. Mm-hmm. And when you have strong churches in your association and your fellowship, there's a lot that you can do. But when you have churches that are struggling or sick, or they're going through high transition rates and turnover, stuff like that, that really hurts that church's ability to be in the association. And honestly, in my time, my 20-year ministry, I've seen a cycle where, there was a bunch of guys who were 40, 30 years in the ministry in the same church, and real strong fellowship of churches in a North region or a South region. Even in the state of Minnesota, you hear guys talk about, oh man, the South used to be really strong and the North was now the North is really strong and the South is a little weak. And, you hear these terminologies thrown out there in conversation. What they're saying is this: the strength of our association resides in the churches and the pastors being able to network in there. And if your church has a high turnover rate, you're going to have very little impact on the association, because your pastor and your leaders need to be plugged into the association for the association to work. So when you talk about the limitations, I think sometimes the limitation is the culture of a church specifically. And they'll say something to the effect like, I don't really see how the association helps us. Well, you guys can't even help yourself, let alone help somebody else. So why don't you allow the association to come in and help you get better? Or why don't you use some of the, a lot of times you look at a church and there's 5 association churches around that church, right? Within an hour. Why don't you allow those other pastors to come in and help you? Have some meetings with them. Say, hey, if you were to look at our church, evaluate our church for us. Or do the secret shopper thing, right? Send one of your members to somebody else's church and find out how they're doing things and see how friendly they are, see how open they are, see how closed the church is. There's a lot of things that an association can do to help, but we are limited by people, right? I mean, we're limited by the congregation's willingness to engage. We're limited by a pastor's willingness to engage. So to think that just because you're in an association that the Council 7 or, the MERBC's or the MBA's leadership have this like big 2x4 stick that we can come in the room with and say, hey, fix or else we're going to knock your pastor out of his position, or we're going to kick you out of the association. None of that stuff exists. That's all like Hollywood type stuff, right? The reality is churches are in the association because they want to intentionally fellowship together with other churches to do something bigger than they can do all by themselves. And when you really get to the nuts and bolts of an association, that's what it's all about. And if you have leadership that are active and networked in the association, you're going to have really strong association ties. But if you have leadership that aren't really engaged with other churches, let's say you have a guy who's kind of a lone ranger and he gets in your leadership, well, they're going to consume the resources out of the association, but they're not going to invest in the other churches. So I think when you look at an association, we're looking to invest ourselves in other churches, help other pastors, other churches do something bigger than they're doing all by themselves. And when an association is doing it right, men's retreats, ladies retreats, state meetings, mission trips, camping ministry, youth activities. I mean, there is a plethora, pulpit fill. But you were talking about limitations. I'll throw that one out there. History is a limitation of an association. And sometimes when churches should be working together outside the association walls, there are those pastors and churches that, almost viewed as like a compromise, like you're going down a slippery slope. If a church of the GRB works with somebody of the MBA, that like we've sinned some cardinal sin. And that can't be further from the truth, because we're all autonomous churches. Working together doesn't change our identity. It just lets us do something bigger than we can do by ourselves.
Yeah. And I think that's something that has always impressed me, and I've found benefit to, is the crossover between, even in Minnesota, the two groups. Where I pastored in Faribault, we had a church in Owatonna that was an MBA church. And the pastor's a good friend of mine, and he was one of my pastoral counselors. And Joe, you were another pastoral counselors, and you're in the MERBC, and one of my third pastoral counselors isn't in any association. And so there's lots of overlap and help, and really in many cases we are brother and sister churches, and we can do a lot together. I think for me, when I think of hindrances, it's kind of what you were saying, Joe, that we expect the association to do more than they really can do, that we do expect that if there's a problem, the association is going to solve it for us. They're going to excommunicate this church or whatever because of, some decision that was made that I didn't like. And really, we are autonomous churches, and the association doesn't have a bearing on that.
I was just going to say real quick there, we have bylaws. We have a constitution, right? We're limited by our bylaws, our constitution, our mission statements as to what we can do. It's not like we're the church police and we're going around to make sure that pastor's teaching right, he's doing right, he's being right, and every little nuance in every church of conflict, it's not like we know about these things. We might find out about them. People might try to tell us about certain things going on in churches, and definitely an aspect of the association is prayer, right? We pray for the churches. I know in the Council of Seven, we divide up the churches in our state, the different reps or different, members of the Council of Seven. And our goal is to interact with those pastors that are on our list and to pray for them and to find out what the needs are in their church and find out what their physical or spiritual needs are as pastors. And, we're trying to be intentional with that stuff. And sometimes when we're doing that, we do find out about problems and we can offer to help. But the reality is, again, we're limited by people. If they don't want help, what can we really do? And to excommunicate a church out of the association, literally the only thing that happens is they quit supporting the association. They quit coming to our state meetings. I mean, the church itself, it's not like we're going to dock their annual stipend that the association gives to them. They don't have one. There is no such thing because there's no central government. There's no monetary benefit to being part of an association. It's your church wanting to invest in other churches, not the organization dictating to you what's going to happen. So, so when there's a problem in a church or when a pastor's going through a hard time, if it's a healthy association, there's going to be people reaching out to that pastor. There's going to be people willing to work with those churches. But the question is, are they willing to work with the association? And if not, then we all sit back and pray for them and watch them struggle, knowing that we all can help. And we try to inject ourselves. But in the end, we don't throw a badge out there and say, I'm with the Special Forces Unit of the GRBC and you guys are in violation. There is no such thing as that. But we can encourage the pastor to do right. We can encourage the church to do right. But in the end, if they choose to do what they do, there's not really anything we can do to stop them. Yeah. Now, doctrinally, we do have some more levers there. If a church is separating from us on a doctrinal position or something like that, there are some things we can do. But again, we're limited by bylaws and constitution. So it's not like we can just say, Jared, I don't like your church anymore. You're out. See ya. Take a hike. That can't happen in the association. So there are a lot of misconceptions out there about what we actually can and can't do. And the national for the GRBC is the same way. They can't just kick you out because they don't like your church name. There has to be a cause and there has to be a consensus for that to happen.
Yeah. And I think the final thing I was going to say is the hindrances is just not utilizing the association. And you can have autonomy by not being a part of it, or you can have autonomy by saying we're not going to utilize it. And we have such a pool of wisdom of men in ministry, pastors, and other churches. Sometimes churches don't want to utilize that and say, well, we want to be by ourselves. We don't want to bring other people in to help with this or that or the other thing, when there's such a wealth of biblical knowledge of men who love God and love the church. And we ought to, either individually as maybe a pastor or corporately as a church, we ought to desire that. And we do ourselves a disservice when we're not willing to reach out for help when we need it, when we're not willing to listen to sound counsel and wisdom when we ought to. And sometimes we can be our own greatest enemy when we just say, I got this, I'm going to figure it out on my own.
Yeah. Would you rather have 5 years of ministry experience or 257 years of ministry experience? I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago where when we figured out how long we had all been in ministry together, 257 years of ministry experience sitting in the room, cumulatively, versus a guy that's been in his church for 5 years. Which one's got more wisdom? Which one has more resources? So, just sitting in a room by yourself, you're limited by the years of experience you have. But man, you go into a room with 10 other guys and you got 257 or even 157 years of ministry experience. I mean, come on, what have those guys not seen, and what have they not handled, and what problem has not already been figured out there? So we do limit ourselves when we do not utilize the resources around us. And I would probably say, for the most part, I know on the national level, I've underutilized our association, but even on the state level, I would say, even as a chairman of the Council of Seven, that I don't always utilize the resources around me. There are times that I probably should have called some other pastors. I should have talked to somebody, and I made a decision. And in hindsight, it's like, man, that would have been so much smarter, because, Jared's already been through that. Micah's already been through that. And those guys would have shared things that I had to learn the hard way and the tough way. So by far, the association brings that angle for sure, but it is very underutilized, as you said, Jared.
Yeah. All right. Well, great. Thank you so much, guys, for sharing your thoughts on the association. It's been a good discussion. As we close, what I usually like to ask at the end of our podcast is if there are any works of God that you just want to give praise for and say a word of thanks, something that God's done in your life, your family's life, that you just want to take time to reflect with us today.
Just even immediate. Yesterday, I got to sit down with a man who is desiring to follow the Lord in believer's baptism. He's sensing the call of God in his life towards ministry, but wants oversight in that. He realizes he's young and wants to be trained. He starts Bible college this fall. So I got to sit down with him yesterday, look over his syllabus, and really set up some weekly time where we're going to mentor. That's what he's specifically requesting. And so just praising the Lord for that, to get to pour into somebody, to disciple and encourage for ministry. That's been a really sweet thing, a work of God.
Great.
We've got a couple things working here at Faith that I'm really excited about. We're getting ready. There's a organization called Eagles Healing Nest that is across the street from our church that is a recovery home for veterans of the U.S. military, Air Force, Marines, Navy, and Army. And they go there for anywhere from a few weeks to several months. And we're going to be starting a weekly Bible study over there here in September. And we're really excited about that. We had it going before COVID happened, and then COVID kind of messed a lot of things up, but we're doing something different this time. And we're really excited about starting that here the first week of September. Also, we got some really cool stuff going on in discipleship, and a lot of new families visiting our church right now. So we're really excited about that as well. This last week alone, we had 4 new families in our church. So, God is doing something there. And I just want to give him the glory because, all we're doing is being faithful. We're not doing anything radical, but God is bringing to us people, sometimes mature people from another church because they moved to the area. And sometimes it's people through discipleship and outreach that we're reaching, and those pay out in the long run. So I want to give praise and a prayer at the same time, because it's awesome to see it happening, but then we want to see them grow. We want to see them mature into viable workers of the gospel that are going out and reaching their concentric circles with the gospel. So we're excited about the discipleship opportunities. And on a personal level, a couple of weeks ago, I got hurt in a race against my daughter and tore my hamstring. And I just praise the Lord that that's been healing really well. And during that time period, it's been fun too, because I got to see our church leadership. And Micah, you witnessed this actually. It was kind of cool.
Yeah.
I got hurt the final night of our vacation Bible school in our church. And I had to call my deacons and everybody and say, hey, I'm down. You guys are going to have to do it tonight. And to see my church family step up and really run the event and finish strong and do the work of the ministry when the shepherd goes down. I don't think there's any more there's not a better compliment in ministry than you can get than like you disappear and the ministry keeps going, right? And so I praise the Lord for that. And that was a huge, huge encouragement to me to watch that happen. So
great. Well, thank you guys for sharing, and thanks for being on our podcast today.
Thanks, Jared. Appreciate it.
Next time on the Central Seminary Podcast.
Pastor Joel, we're going to fire the pastor tomorrow. We think that's going to go bad. What do you think?
How does the pastoral responsibility to lead mesh with the congregation's responsibility to follow?
What are the 2 or 3 high-level objectives that we need to be pushing for?
What if it's a church that is a single or solo pastor-led church?
There's a biblical way we can address these practical differences without going to war with each other.
When things are going smoothly in the ministry,
let's think biblically about how the Lord would want us to work through some of these differences that we have.
How can pastors take advantage of maybe the smooth time when things are going well, people are on board, without upsetting that?
We walk with the leaders as they are working through decision making.
Follow me as I follow Christ.
That doesn't add to unity within the church body.
And what you're saying is so common.
And when we get out on the other side, we actually aren't out on the other side because we're locked up in our head.
What is the balance then between teaching and leading?
We don't take a posture of, okay, we know what we're doing and you don't, and we're going to set you straight.
And at the end of the day, you want to have more chips than you started off with. Look for our next episode on the Central Seminary Podcast. Thanks for listening to the Central Seminary Podcast. Our mission at Central Seminary is to assist New Testament churches in equipping spiritual leaders for Christ-exalting biblical ministry. Since its founding in 1956, Central Seminary has sought to provide serious students of God's Word with robust theological education as they prepare for ministry. We have many graduates around the world who are serving in countless ways to spread the gospel and proclaim the name of Jesus Christ. Find out more at our website, centralseminary.edu.